The relentless summer sun bore down on Caldwell, Idaho Territory, like God's own branding iron as Rebecca Mills stumbled from the stagecoach, her once fine dress coated in the dust of 1,000 miles. The whispers began before her second boot even touched the ground, women's voices sharp as rattlesnake warnings, men's low and mocking as they assessed the pale, thin woman with hollow eyes who clutched a small leather-bound journal to her chest as if it contained her very soul. Idaho Territory, 1878. A place where survival demanded strength, and Rebecca Mills appeared to have none left to give. The journey west had drained what little vitality remained in her body after the consumption took her parents and younger brother in Philadelphia. The doctor had given her 6 months at most, suggesting the dry western air might extend her life, though few believed it would save it. Rebecca had sold everything to make the journey, driven by something beyond mere survival, a desperate need to die somewhere other than the sickroom where her family had drawn their last breaths. Another delicate eastern flower come to wilt in our sun. A woman in a practical calico dress remarked loudly enough for Rebecca to hear as she collected her single trunk. "She won't last the summer," her companion agreed with a nod that sent her bonnet ribbons dancing. "Poor thing can't bear life, look at her, barely standing." Rebecca's fingers tightened around the journal. She'd heard worse in Philadelphia after the funeral. The pitying glances, the whispered predictions of her imminent demise. She hadn't traveled 2,000 miles to hear the same judgment from different mouths. "Madam, you'll be wanting the boarding house, I expect," the stagecoach driver said, not unkindly as he handed down her trunk. "Just down the street there, Mrs. Peterson's place with the blue shutters." "Decent enough for a lady." Rebecca nodded her thanks, wondering if she could manage the walk. Her trunk wasn't large, she'd sold most of her belongings, but in her weakened state, it might as well have been filled with lead. "I'll take that for you." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady as the mountains that rose in the distance. Rebecca turned to find herself looking up at a tall man whose face was partially shadowed by the brim of a well-worn hat. Unlike the other men loitering near the stage depot in their town clothes, he wore the practical garb of a working cowboy: denim pants, checked shirt, leather vest, and boots bearing the unmistakable marks of hard use. "I couldn't impose," she began, but a coughing fit seized her, forcing her to press her handkerchief to her mouth. When she pulled it away, it was spotted with blood. The cowboy said nothing about the handkerchief, though his eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-browned skin, registered understanding. He simply picked up her trunk with one hand as if it weighed nothing. No imposition. "I'm headed that way." He touched the brim of his hat. "Matthew Lynch." Rebecca managed a small smile. "Rebecca Mills. Thank you, Mr. Lynch." As they walked slowly down Caldwell's main street, Rebecca was acutely aware of the stares following them. Matthew Lynch was known here. That much was clear from the nods of acknowledgement he received. But there was something in those greetings that suggested respect rather than warmth. "You planning to stay in Caldwell long, Miss Mills?" Matthew asked after they'd gone a block in silence. Rebecca considered the question. "I haven't planned much beyond arriving, Mr. Lynch. I'm here for my health." The half-truth came easily. Everyone assumed a pale Eastern woman had come west for the curative air. Matthew's sidelong glance told her he heard what she wasn't saying. "Idaho's a good place to heal. Air's clean, land's honest in its way." "And the people?" she asked before she could stop herself. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Some better than others, like anywhere." They reached the boarding house, a tidy 2-story structure with the promised blue shutters and a small, well-tended garden. Matthew carried her trunk up the steps to the porch but paused before knocking. Mrs. Peterson runs a decent house, but she's got a sharp tongue and sharper ears. Anything you'd rather the whole town didn't know by supper time, keep it to yourself. Rebecca nodded. I've little to hide, Mr. Lynch. His eyes, too perceptive by half, studied her face. Everyone's got something, Miss Mills, especially those who have come as far as you have. Before she could respond, the door opened to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with assessing eyes and a tight smile. Matthew Lynch, are you bringing trouble to my doorstep? The woman asked, though her tone held no real censure. Just a new boarder, Mrs. Peterson. Miss Rebecca Mills, lately of Philadelphia. Mrs. Peterson's shrewd gaze took in Rebecca's travel-worn appearance and pallor. Another one come for the air, I suppose. Well, come in, child. I've a room on the second floor. First floor would be better, Matthew interrupted. Miss Mills has had a long journey. The older woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. Very well. The small room off the kitchen garden is available. $5 a week, meals included. It was more than Rebecca had hoped to pay, but the thought of climbing stairs every day was daunting. That would be suitable. Thank you. Matthew carried her trunk to the small but clean room that was to be her new home. A narrow bed with an iron frame occupied one wall, a washstand and small dresser another. The window overlooked a kitchen garden where herbs and vegetables grew in neat rows. This will do nicely, Rebecca said, removing her gloves. I'm grateful for your assistance, Mr. Lynch. Matthew, he corrected gently. Most folks around here just call me Lynch, but you're welcome to Matthew. His informality surprised her, but Rebecca found she didn't mind. Then you must call me Rebecca, he nodded, his expression unreadable as he looked at her. You should rest. The stage journey's hard on anyone. Yes, I believe I will. She hesitated. Will I see you again, Matthew? Something flickered in his eyes, caution perhaps, or its opposite. I'm in town most Saturdays. Run cattle on a spread about 10 miles north. After he left, Rebecca sank onto the bed, exhaustion claiming her as the sounds of the unfamiliar town filtered through her window. She'd come to Caldwell to die in peace, away from memories and pitying glances. She hadn't expected kindness from a blue-eyed stranger who carried her trunk and called the land honest. Sleep claimed her before she could consider what that might mean. Rebecca awoke to the clatter of dishes and soft morning light filtering through the curtains. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in Philadelphia, that her mother would soon bring tea to ease her morning cough. Then, reality settled around her like a familiar shawl. Her parents were gone, and she was in a strange town 2,000 miles from everything she'd known. A soft knock at her door roused her fully. Mrs. Peterson entered with a tray bearing a pot of tea, toast, and a small bowl of preserves. I thought you might want something light before facing the dining room, the older woman said. New boarders are always of interest, especially ones who arrive with Matthew Lynch as escort. Rebecca sat up, reaching for her shawl. He was merely being kind. We met at the stage depot. Mrs. Peterson's expression suggested she found this unlikely. Lynch isn't known for random acts of kindness, dear. Keeps to himself mostly, except for necessary business. Has since he came back from the war. Rebecca poured tea with hands that trembled slightly. The war's been over for 13 years. Some men never really come back, Mrs. Peterson said with surprising gentleness. His ranch does well enough better than most, but folks here remember when he was different, before. Rebecca sipped her tea, wondering what Matthew Lynch had been like before whatever shadows had claimed him. Does he have family? The older woman's face closed slightly. Not anymore, but that's his story to tell if he chooses. She moved toward the door. Rest today. Tomorrow's soon enough to meet the other boarders. Left alone, Rebecca ate what she could of the toast, thinking about the quiet cowboy who'd helped her. There had been something in his eyes, not pity, which she'd grown to hate, but recognition. As if he too knew what it was to be marked by life in ways others could see but not understand. She spent that first day in Caldwell resting, venturing only as far as the small garden behind the boarding house, where she sat reading for an hour when the afternoon shadows made it cooler. By the next morning, she felt strong enough to join the other boarders at breakfast, two elderly sisters who taught at the local school, a young bank clerk named Thomas, and a middle-aged widow who served as the town's seamstress. "You're from Philadelphia?" the bank clerk asked eagerly. "My cousin attended university there. Perhaps you knew him, Harold Weaver." Rebecca shook her head. "Philadelphia is quite large, Mr. Olson. I'm afraid I didn't move in university circles." "What brings you all the way to Idaho Territory, Miss Mills?" one of the elderly teachers asked, buttering her toast with precise movements. "Family, health," Rebecca answered simply, having decided honesty was simplest. "My doctor recommended the western air." Meaningful glances passed between the boarders. The consumption was recognizable to anyone who'd seen it: the pallor, the thinness, the occasional cough that Rebecca tried to suppress. "Well, the air is certainly dry here," the seamstress offered brightly. "Mrs. Peterson, could you pass the preserves? Your blackberry is exceptional this year." The conversation turned to local matters: a new shipment at the general store, plans for the upcoming harvest festival, the minister's wife expecting their 5th child. Rebecca listened, gathering information about her new home while conserving her strength. After breakfast, she decided to explore the town. Caldwell wasn't large: a main street with the essential businesses, several side streets of homes, a white-painted church, and a schoolhouse. The mountains rose in the distance, magnificent and indifferent to the small human settlement at their feet. The general store was her first destination, needing to replenish her supply of handkerchiefs and perhaps find some writing paper. The shop was well stocked, with goods from the East displayed proudly alongside local products. "You must be Miss Mills," the shopkeeper greeted her. "Word travels fast in Caldwell. I'm Daniel Harris. My wife and I run the store." "A pleasure, Mr. Harris." Rebecca examined the handkerchiefs displayed in a glass case. "These, please, half a dozen. And do you carry writing paper?" As Harris gathered her purchases, the bell above the door jingled and several women entered. Their conversation halted when they spotted Rebecca. "Well, if it isn't our Eastern visitor," one said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Harriet Simmons, dear. My husband's the mayor." "This is Clara Wilson and Jane Thatcher." Rebecca nodded politely. "Rebecca Mills. How do you do?" The women exchanged glances. "We were just saying yesterday, weren't we, Clara, that the journey west is taxing for delicate constitutions. You look exhausted, my dear." "I'm feeling stronger each day, thank you," Rebecca replied, keeping her voice even. "I heard Lynch brought you to Mrs. Peterson's," Jane Thatcher said, her curiosity poorly disguised as concern. "Strange. He hardly speaks to anyone these days." "Mr. Lynch was kind enough to carry my trunk," Rebecca explained, wishing to end the conversation. Her chest was beginning to feel tight, warning of an impending coughing fit. "Well, do let us know if you need anything," Harriet said, her tone suggesting Rebecca would need many things she couldn't possibly provide for herself. "Though I imagine you won't be staying long. Most who come for the air find our little town doesn't offer much else to sustain them." "She can't bear life out here," Clara Wilson added in a stage whisper as Rebecca turned away. "Look at her, poor thing. Another month and she'll be heading back east." Rebecca completed her purchase, fighting to control her breathing until she was outside. The women's words stung more than they should have. She hadn't come to Caldwell expecting to live, but neither had she come to be dismissed as already dead. Making her way to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree at the edge of the small town square, Rebecca closed her eyes and focused on drawing breath into her damaged lungs. She'd nearly regained her composure when a shadow fell across her. Miss Mills. She opened her eyes to find Matthew Lynch standing before her, his expression concerned. He wore the same practical clothes as before, though his hat was in his hands rather than on his head. "Mr. Lynch, Matthew, I didn't expect to see you until Saturday. Had business with the blacksmith." He sat beside her when she gestured to the space on the bench. "You're looking stronger today." It was a kind lie, but Rebecca appreciated it. "I met some of the local ladies just now. They seem to think I'll be leaving soon one way or another." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Small towns run on talk." "Don't pay it mind. I've heard worse," she admitted. "In Philadelphia, after my family died, people spoke of me as if I weren't present. Poor Rebecca, fading away like a shadow, as if I had already gone." Matthew was silent for a long moment, his hands turning his hat brim slowly. "After Gettysburg, when I was in the field hospital, nurses would talk over me the same way. This one won't last the night, made me determined to prove them wrong." Rebecca studied his profile, seeing for the first time a thin scar that ran from his right temple into his hairline. "Is that why you came west?" He nodded. "Nothing left in Virginia after the war. Land was ruined, family gone. Figured I'd die somewhere new at least." His eyes met hers, startlingly direct. "But I didn't." The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning. Rebecca felt something stir within her, not hope exactly, but its distant cousin, curiosity perhaps, interest in something beyond her own approaching end. "I should return to Mrs. Peterson's," she said finally. "I've been out longer than I intended." Matthew stood, offering his hand. When she took it, his calloused palm was warm against her cool fingers. "I'll walk with you." As they made their way back to the boarding house, Rebecca found herself wanting to know more about this quiet man who had survived against expectations. "Have you been in Caldwell long?" 12 years. Came in '66 with nothing but a bad leg and worse nightmares. Worked as a ranch hand until I could buy my own place." He glanced at her. "It's not much compared to Eastern Standard's 2-room cabin, barn, good grazing land, but it's mine." "It sounds wonderful," Rebecca said sincerely. After months of sick rooms and funeral parlors, the idea of open land and a simple home held immense appeal. They reached the boarding house too quickly. On the porch, Rebecca turned to thank him for the escort, but a coughing spasm overtook her. Matthew steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his face grave but unsurprised as she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. When the fit passed, she expected him to make his excuses and leave. Instead, he said quietly, "I'll be in town on Saturday. Would you care to have dinner at the hotel restaurant?" It's the closest thing Caldwell has to fine dining. Surprise rendered Rebecca momentarily speechless. No one had invited her to dinner since before her illness became apparent. "I would like that very much." A smile transformed his solemn face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. 6 o'clock then. I'll call for you here." After he left, Rebecca sat in the garden, wondering what had prompted Matthew Lynch to invite a dying woman to dinner. Pity seemed the obvious answer, but nothing in his manner suggested he pitied her. Rather, he looked at her as if he recognized something in her, a kinship of experience that transcended their different paths. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Rebecca opened her journal and began to write. The week passed slowly. Rebecca paced herself carefully, resting often but forcing herself to take short walks each day. Mrs. Peterson proved to be an unexpected ally, bringing herbal teas she claimed would strengthen the lungs and sharing town gossip that painted a fuller picture of Caldwell and its inhabitants. that Harriet Simmons has always thought too highly of herself. The older woman sniffed when Rebecca mentioned meeting the mayor's wife. Just because her husband wears a fancy watch chain and gives speeches at every opportunity. Their house leaks something terrible when it rains, but you won't hear them admit it. By Saturday, Rebecca had established a tentative routine and felt stronger than she had in months. Whether it was the dry air, Mrs. Peterson's teas, or simply being away from the miasma of grief that had permeated her Philadelphia home, she couldn't say. She knew better than to mistake a temporary reprieve for recovery, but she was grateful for it nonetheless. At precisely 6 o'clock, Matthew arrived at the boarding house. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes were clean, his hair neatly combed, and he wore a proper suit jacket despite the warmth of the evening. Rebecca had done the same, wearing her one remaining good dress, a deep blue silk that had once complemented her complexion before illness leached the color from her cheeks. "You look lovely," Matthew said simply as she joined him on the porch. The hotel restaurant was indeed the finest establishment in Caldwell, with tablecloths and proper place settings. Rebecca felt the stares of the other diners as Matthew escorted her to a table by the window, but for once, the whispers didn't bother her. Let them talk. She was having dinner with the most intriguing man she'd met in years. "Mrs. Peterson tells me you were a cavalry officer," Rebecca said after they had ordered. Matthew nodded. "Virginia Cavalry. Joined in 61, fought until Gettysburg in 63. That's where this happened." He gestured to his right leg. "Minié ball shattered the bone. Doctors wanted to amputate, but a nurse intervened, said I was young and strong and might keep it if they were careful. She was right, though it's never been the same." And after the hospital, his expression darkened. "Prisoner exchange. Made it back to Virginia in time to find our farm burned and my parents' dead fever took them while I was gone. My brother died at Chancellorsville, sister, already lost in childbirth before the war. That was that." Rebecca's heart ached for the young man he'd been, returning wounded to find everything lost. "So you came west?" "Not right away, drifted for a while, worked where I could, drank too much." He met her eyes, unflinching in his honesty, thought about ending it more than once. "What stopped you?" she asked softly. Matthew was silent for a moment, considering. Stubbornness, maybe, or spite. Didn't want to give those hospital nurses the satisfaction of being right, even if they'd never know it. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Eventually, I realized I was still breathing despite everything. Figured I might as well make something of the life I hadn't managed to lose." The waiter brought their food: beefsteak, potatoes, and early summer vegetables. Rebecca ate slowly, savoring flavors that her diminished appetite had prevented her from enjoying for months. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Matthew prompted. "What did you leave behind?" Rebecca set down her fork. "Not much in the end. My father was a professor of literature. My mother taught piano. They were devoted to each other and to my brother and me. When the consumption came, it took my brother first. He was only 16. Then my father, then my mother, all within 6 months. And you got sick after," she nodded. "The doctor said it was inevitable, living in the same house. I sold everything except a few keepsakes to pay their debts and my passage west." Matthew's eyes held hers, his gaze steady. "Why Caldwell? There are sanitariums in Colorado, places set up for treating consumption." "I didn't want to be treated," Rebecca admitted. "I wanted to be somewhere new. Somewhere I wasn't Rebecca Mills, the last of her family, poor thing. Somewhere I could just be myself for whatever time I have left." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You came here to die on your own terms." "Yes." She'd never said it so plainly, not even to herself. "But now I find I'm not in such a hurry after all." The moment stretched between them, laden with possibility. Then Matthew smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Good. Caldwell could use more people who know their own minds. As they walked back to the boarding house after dinner, Rebecca felt a curious lightness. The evening air was soft, scented with sage and the distant promise of rain. Matthew walked beside her, matching his stride to her slower pace. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they reached Mrs. Peterson's gate. "I've enjoyed myself more than I can express." Matthew took her hand, his touch gentle. "Would you like to see my ranch? Not tomorrow, I know that would be too much, but next Saturday perhaps. I could bring the buckboard, make it an easy ride." The invitation startled her. Going 10 miles from town was ambitious given her condition, yet Rebecca found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the practicalities. "I'd like that very much." His smile was worth any risk. "I'll come for you at 9. We'll take it slow." After he left, Rebecca sat on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. For the first time in over a year, she found herself thinking about the future not with dread or resignation, but with a flicker of interest. The following week brought increasingly curious glances from the other boarders and townspeople Rebecca encountered on her daily walks. Word of her dinner with Matthew Lynch had spread through Caldwell like wildfire, generating speculation that ranged from the mildly interested to the actively disapproving. "Lynch hasn't taken a woman to dinner in all the years he's been here," Mrs. Peterson informed her over afternoon tea. "Not that there haven't been interested parties. Clara Wilson tried her best after her husband died, but Lynch wouldn't give her the time of day." "Perhaps he was just being kind to a newcomer," Rebecca suggested, though she knew it wasn't true. There had been something in Matthew's eyes when he looked at her, a recognition, a connection that went beyond simple charity. Mrs. Peterson snorted inelegantly. "That man doesn't do anything from mere kindness. If he took you to dinner, it's because he wanted your company specifically." She studied Rebecca's face. "Be careful with him. He's a good man underneath it all, but he carries burdens you might not be strong enough to bear." The warning might have offended Rebecca from anyone else, but she understood Mrs. Peterson's concern came from genuine care. "I'm stronger than I look." "Yes," the older woman agreed unexpectedly. "I believe you are." Saturday dawned clear and warm. Rebecca had spent the week conserving her strength, resting more than usual in anticipation of the outing. She dressed carefully in her most practical skirt and blouse, adding a light shawl and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. Matthew arrived precisely at 9 with a well-maintained buckboard pulled by 2 steady horses. He'd thoughtfully filled the back with hay and blankets, creating a comfortable seat for Rebecca. "The ride gets bumpy in places," he explained as he helped her up. "This will make it easier on your bones." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Rebecca deeply. Most people either ignored her illness entirely or treated her as if she might shatter at any moment. Matthew acknowledged her limitations without defining her by them. They left Caldwell behind, following a well-worn trail that led north through sagebrush plains toward distant foothills. Matthew pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a distinctive rock formation where stagecoach robbers had once ambushed travelers, a stream where he'd found his first gold nugget, though there hadn't been a second, the remains of an old trapper's cabin from before the territory was settled. "How did you choose this part of Idaho?" Rebecca asked as they stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a cottonwood grove. The mountains rose ahead of them, massive and serene. Matthew handed her a canteen of cool water. "Didn't exactly choose it. Horse went lame outside Caldwell, and I didn't have money for another. Got work at the Peterson place. Mrs. Peterson's husband was still alive then. By the time I'd saved enough to move on, I'd gotten used to the place." He gazed at the mountains. "There's a kind of peace here." Land doesn't care who you were before or what you did. Just matters what you do with it now. Rebecca understood. She'd felt something similar since arriving in Caldwell, a freedom from the weight of her past, the expectations and memories that had smothered her in Philadelphia. They continued their journey, cresting a small rise that revealed a valley below. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, bordered by trees that provided welcome green against the tawny landscape. Near the creek stood a sturdy cabin with a front porch, a barn, and several outbuildings. Fields of hay stretched behind it and cattle grazed on the hillsides. "There it is," Matthew said, a note of pride in his voice. "Lynch Ranch." It was beautiful in its simplicity, a working ranch carved from wilderness through one man's determination. Rebecca found herself deeply moved by what Matthew had accomplished alone, starting with nothing but his will to survive. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. They descended into the valley, passing through a gate marked with a simple L brand. As they approached the cabin, a dog raced out to greet them, a large, rangy animal with one ear standing upright and the other flopped over. "That's Jack," Matthew said as the dog barked enthusiastically. "Found him half dead in a trap 2 winters ago. He's not much for looks, but he's the best cattle dog in the territory." Jack circled the wagon, tail wagging furiously as Matthew helped Rebecca down. The dog approached her cautiously, sniffing her skirts before deciding she was acceptable and pressing against her legs in greeting. "He likes you," Matthew observed with a smile. "He's particular about people." "As am I," Rebecca replied, scratching the dog's good ear. "We understand each other." The cabin was simple but well built, with 2 main rooms, a combined kitchen and living area, and a bedroom visible through a partially open door. Everything was scrupulously clean and in good repair, from the stone fireplace to the handmade furniture. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that surprised Rebecca with their variety: history, poetry, novels, practical guides to ranching and veterinary care. "You're a reader," she said, running her fingers along the spines. Matthew nodded. "My father taught at a small college before the war. Books were always important in our home." He moved to the stove where a pot simmered. "I hope you're hungry. Venison stew's been cooking since before dawn." They ate at a table by the window, the view across the valley serving as their dining backdrop. The stew was delicious, rich with vegetables from Matthew's garden and herbs he'd gathered from the hillsides. Rebecca ate more than she had in months, finding her appetite awakened by the fresh air and simple, flavorful food. After the meal, Matthew showed her around the property: the barn with its horses and milk cow, the chicken coop, the garden where he grew vegetables and even a few flowers. Rebecca walked slowly, pausing often to rest, but Matthew never rushed her or suggested they turn back. At the creek, they sat on a fallen log in the dappled shade of cottonwoods. Jack sprawled at their feet, occasionally rising to investigate interesting scents before returning to his post. "I wasn't sure you'd come today," Matthew admitted, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "It's a long way from town for someone who's ill." Rebecca looked at him, noting the tension in his profile. "You think I'm being reckless?" "No." He turned to meet her gaze. "I think you're living while you can. I understand that better than most." Impulsively, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "When I arrived in Caldwell, I thought I was just finding a quiet place to die. I never expected." She trailed off, uncertain how to express the awakening she'd experienced since meeting him. "Nor did I," Matthew said quietly. "After Mary and the baby died, I didn't think I'd ever want to care about anyone again." Rebecca felt a small shock. "You were married?" He nodded, his eyes on their joined hands. "Briefly. Met Mary in Denver in '67. She was a school teacher, newly arrived from Kansas. We married 6 months later, came to Idaho together. She died in childbirth in '69, along with our son. That's when I bought this place, needed somewhere to start fresh. I'm so sorry, Rebecca whispered, understanding now the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. It was a long time ago, Matthew said, though his voice suggested the wound wasn't entirely healed. But afterward, I decided it was safer to keep to myself. Until I saw you stepping down from that stagecoach, looking like you might blow away in the next breeze. Rebecca smiled despite the gravity of the moment. Not a very flattering first impression. It wasn't that. Matthew's gaze was intent, searching her face. It was your eyes. You looked determined, like someone who'd seen the worst already and wasn't afraid anymore. His voice softened. I recognized that look. The distance between them seemed to shrink, the afternoon light gilding Matthew's features as he leaned closer. Rebecca felt her heart quicken as his free hand came up to touch her cheek with infinite gentleness. I know you didn't come west looking for this, he said, his voice low. Neither did I, but I find myself thinking about you all the time, Rebecca. Your courage, your quiet strength. Matthew, she breathed, unable to form more words as his face came closer to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Rebecca responded. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with desire rather than clinical detachment or pitying caution. She felt alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible, her body responding despite its weakness. When they finally drew apart, Matthew's eyes were dark with emotion. I shouldn't have your health, Rebecca pressed her fingers to his lips. My health is what it is, but I'm still alive, Matthew. For the first time in years, I'm remembering what that means. They returned to the cabin as the afternoon waned, both quiet with the weight of what had passed between them. As Matthew helped her into the buckboard for the journey back to town, his hands lingered on her waist. Will you come again? He asked, his voice rough with feelings he seemed unused to expressing. Yes, Rebecca answered without hesitation. As often as I can. The ride back to Caldwell was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with shared understanding rather than awkwardness. As they approached town, however, Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest that signaled an impending coughing fit. She tried to suppress it, not wanting to remind Matthew of her condition after the perfect day they'd shared, but the cough broke free despite her efforts. Matthew stopped the wagon, supporting her as the spasm took hold. When it passed, leaving her gasping and weak, he handed her a clean handkerchief to replace the one now spotted with blood. I'm sorry, she whispered, embarrassed despite herself. Matthew's expression was tender but unflinching as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Don't apologize for things you can't control. Most men would run from this, Rebecca said, gesturing to the stained handkerchief. From me. I'm not most men, Matthew replied simply. And you're worth far more than the disease that's trying to claim you. They re-entered Caldwell as dusk was falling, the streets quieter than during the day but not deserted. Rebecca was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way as Matthew drove to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. By morning, everyone in town would know she'd spent the day at Lynch Ranch. At the boarding house, Matthew helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. Rest tomorrow, he instructed gently. You've done more today than your body's accustomed to. It was worth it, Rebecca assured him. Every minute, he smiled, touching her cheek briefly before stepping back. I'll come to town on Wednesday. May I call on you? Please do. After he'd gone, Rebecca found Mrs. Peterson waiting in the parlor, her knitting needles clicking rapidly as she studied Rebecca's flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Had a good day, did you? The older woman asked mildly. Wonderful, Rebecca answered honestly. "The ranch is beautiful." Mrs. Peterson set her knitting aside. "You care for him?" It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded anyway. "Yes, more than I expected to care for anyone again, The older woman's expression was unreadable. "Lynch is a good man, but loving someone like him isn't easy. He carries dark memories." "So do I," Rebecca pointed out. Mrs. Peterson's face softened. "Yes, I suppose you do." She rose, patting Rebecca's hand. "Just be careful, dear. Both of you have known enough heartbreak." That night, Rebecca wrote in her journal until her hand cramped, trying to capture the day's events and the tumult of emotions they had stirred. For the first time since her diagnosis, she found herself thinking of the future with something other than dread, wondering what it might be like to spend more days at the ranch, to see the seasons change across that beautiful valley, to wake beside Matthew Lynch and fall asleep in his arms. It was dangerous to hope. She knew her disease wouldn't miraculously vanish, that each passing month would likely see her weaker, her breaths more labored. Yet something had awakened in her that refused to be silenced by medical certainty, a fierce desire to live whatever life remained to her with meaning and joy. As the summer progressed, Rebecca and Matthew fell into a rhythm. He came to town twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. On Wednesdays, they would have dinner at the hotel or walk slowly through town, Matthew matching his stride to hers. On Saturdays, weather permitting, he would take her to the ranch where she would sit on the porch or by the creek while he worked, content to watch him move through his world with capable hands and quiet confidence. The townspeople's reactions ranged from disapproval to grudging acceptance. Some, like Harriet Simmons and her circle, made little effort to hide their conviction that the relationship was doomed a dying woman, and a man haunted by his past could hardly build anything lasting. They whispered behind raised hands. "She can't bear life out here for long," Rebecca overheard Clara Wilson telling the general store owner's wife one afternoon. "Poor Lynch will be burying another woman before winter." The words stung, but Rebecca had grown stronger in ways that had nothing to do with her physical condition. She met Clara's eyes directly when the woman realized she'd been overheard. "You seem very concerned with my health, Mrs. Wilson," Rebecca said calmly. "How fortunate I am to have such attentive neighbors." Clara had the grace to flush before hurrying away, but Rebecca knew the gossip wouldn't stop. In a small town like Caldwell, other people's lives were the primary entertainment. By late July, Rebecca had become a fixture at Lynch Ranch on Saturdays, bringing picnic lunches packed by Mrs. Peterson and books to read, while Matthew tended to ranch work he couldn't postpone. Jack the dog had appointed himself her guardian, staying close to her side and alerting Matthew if her coughing grew worse. On one such Saturday, as they sat by the creek after a simple lunch, Matthew took her hand, his expression more serious than usual. "I've been thinking," he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "About us, about the future." Rebecca felt her heart quicken. "Have you?" He nodded, eyes on the flowing water. "I know your condition isn't improving, Rebecca. I see how hard some days are, how much effort it takes just to breathe." His gaze returned to her face. "But I also see how much life there is in you, how much strength." "Matthew, let me finish," he said gently. "I lost Mary and our son because I wasn't there. I was in town when her labor started too early, and by the time I got back." He swallowed hard. "I promised myself I'd never put myself through that kind of loss again. But then you stepped off that stagecoach, and something in me knew right away that promise was going to be broken." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to cause you pain." "That's not in your control," Matthew said, his voice steady. "What matters is the time we have, however long or short it might be." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This was my mother's. I've been carrying it since I decided what I wanted to ask you." Inside the box was a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. Rebecca stared at it, understanding dawning slowly. "I'm asking you to marry me, Rebecca, to live here with me for as long as we're granted." Matthew's voice was rough with emotion. "I know it might not be long. I know there will be hard days. But I'd rather have those hard days with you than easy ones without you." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. "You know what you're asking. To watch me grow weaker, to nurse me when I can't get out of bed, to love you through all of it," Matthew interrupted. "Yes, I know exactly what I'm asking. The question is whether you're willing to let me." Rebecca looked into his eyes, seeing not blind optimism but clear-eyed love, a man who understood exactly what he was choosing and chose it anyway. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Matthew Lynch." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady even as his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "When?" she asked against his shoulder. "As soon as you're ready," he answered. "Next week." "Tomorrow. Tonight. I don't want to waste a single day we could have together." Rebecca laughed through her tears. "Let's be slightly practical. It will take time to arrange things with Reverend Collins, and Mrs. Peterson would never forgive us if she didn't have at least a few days to prepare." Matthew smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. "1 week then. Next Saturday. Here at the ranch with the mountains as our witnesses." Word of their engagement spread through Caldwell like wildfire. Reactions were mixed, as Rebecca had expected. Some, like Mrs. Peterson and the elderly teacher sisters, offered sincere congratulations. Others barely disguised their certainty that the marriage was a mistake. "He'll be a widower again before Christmas," Rebecca overheard Jane Thatcher telling the seamstress. "She can't bear life out here for another season. Anyone with eyes can see she's failing." The comment might have crushed Rebecca's spirit weeks earlier, but now she found it oddly powerless to hurt her. Let them think what they would. She and Matthew understood what they were choosing: not a conventional future with decades of certainty, but a present filled with love that made whatever time they had meaningful. The wedding preparations were simple. Rebecca had no family to consult and few possessions to move. Matthew added a rocking chair to the porch and cleared space in his bedroom for her things. Mrs. Peterson insisted on baking a proper wedding cake and organizing refreshments for the small gathering of well-wishers who would attend. On the Wednesday before the wedding, Matthew took Rebecca to the town's small jewelry shop to select a ring for him. "I never thought I'd wear one again," he admitted as the jeweler showed them several plain gold bands. "After Mary, I put my first wedding ring away in a box. Couldn't bear to see it, couldn't bear to sell it either." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "We can wait if you need more time." Matthew shook his head firmly. "No, this is right, Rebecca. I'm not replacing what I lost. I'm building something new, something I never expected to find again." They chose a simple band that fit Matthew's work-roughened hand. The jeweler promised to have it ready by Saturday and offered his congratulations with genuine warmth that touched Rebecca deeply. As they walked back to the boarding house, they passed Harriet Simmons and Clara Wilson coming out of the millinery shop. The women's conversation halted abruptly as they spotted the engaged couple. "Miss Mills, Mr. Lynch," Harriet greeted them with a tight smile. "I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons," Rebecca replied politely, Clara Wilson's eyes fixed on Rebecca's flushed cheeks and the way she leaned slightly on Matthew's arm. "You're looking rather tired today, my dear. This excitement must be taxing for someone in your condition." Before Rebecca could respond, Matthew spoke, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. My fiancée manages her condition with more grace than most people manage a hangnail, Mrs. Wilson. Your concern, while noted, is unnecessary. Harriet's eyebrows rose at his directness. Well, we only meant— I know exactly what you meant, Matthew interrupted. And I'd appreciate if you'd keep such observations to yourselves in the future. Rebecca has more courage and strength than people who have never faced real hardship could possibly understand. The women retreated, murmuring indignantly about manners and sensitivity. When they were out of earshot, Rebecca looked up at Matthew with a mixture of surprise and amusement. That was rather direct. Matthew's jaw was still tight. They've been whispering since you arrived. She can't bear life, they say, as if they know anything about you or what you've endured. His expression softened as he looked at her. You gave me back my life, Rebecca. A life I'd stopped really living years ago. That's worth more than they could ever understand. Rebecca's heart swelled with love for this man who saw her so clearly not as a dying woman to be pitied, but as a person whose presence had value beyond measure. Take me home, Matthew, she said softly. To our home. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the August sun warming the valley as Rebecca prepared in the small guest room Matthew had added to the cabin for occasional visitors. Mrs. Peterson had come early to help her dress, bringing a crown of wildflowers to wear instead of a conventional veil. You make a beautiful bride, the older woman said, adjusting the simple white dress they'd worked on together over the past week. It wasn't elaborate. Rebecca's strength wouldn't have allowed for hours of standing for fittings, but the fine cotton was flattering, the lace at the collar and cuffs delicate without being fussy. I never thought I'd be a bride at all, Rebecca admitted, touching the wildflower crown with gentle fingers. After the diagnosis, I put away such dreams. Mrs. Peterson's eyes were suspiciously bright. Well, Lynch is a fortunate man, diagnosis or no. And you've brought something back to him that I thought was gone forever. A small group had gathered outside the elderly teacher sisters, the blacksmith and his wife, the general store owner and his family, and a few of the ranch hands who worked for neighboring spreads and respected Matthew. Reverend Collins stood ready beneath an arch of wildflowers that Matthew had constructed the previous day. When Rebecca emerged from the cabin on Mrs. Peterson's arm, the older woman having insisted on standing in for the mother of the bride, a hush fell over the gathering. Matthew stood waiting, cleaned up but still recognizably himself in a good suit that couldn't quite disguise the rancher beneath. His eyes never left Rebecca as she made her way slowly toward him, her steps careful but determined. The ceremony was brief, tailored to accommodate Rebecca's stamina. They spoke the traditional vows with voices clear and unwavering, each word a promise neither took lightly. When Matthew placed the gold band on her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady. When Rebecca slipped the matching band onto his finger, her touch lingered, a silent affirmation of all they'd pledged. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Collins declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Matthew kissed her gently, mindful of their audience but unable to completely hide the depth of his feelings. As they turned to face their guests, Rebecca caught sight of unexpected additions at the back of the gathering: Harriet Simmons and her husband, Clara Wilson, and several other townspeople who had been less than supportive of their relationship. The reception was simple: cake and punch served on tables Matthew had set up beneath the cottonwoods, music provided by the blacksmith's son on fiddle and his daughter on guitar. Rebecca sat for much of it, conserving her strength, but she insisted on one dance with her husband, moving slowly in his arms as the fiddle played a gentle waltz. "Are you happy?" Matthew asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Rebecca looked up at him, taking in the features that had become so dear to her, the strong line of his jaw, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the mouth that could be stern in repose but transformed his entire face when he smiled. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" His arms tightened around her. "I thought happiness was something I'd left behind in Virginia before the war. You proved me wrong." As the celebration continued, Harriet Simmons approached, her expression difficult to read. "Mrs. Lynch," she said, the new name sounding strange but right to Rebecca's ears. "I wanted to offer my congratulations in person." "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons," Rebecca replied, genuinely surprised by the gesture. Harriet hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I also owe you an apology. I've been unkind in my judgments of your situation. It was wrong of me." The admission clearly cost the proud woman something. Rebecca smiled gently. "We all make judgments based on what we can see, Mrs. Simmons, but there's always more to the story." Harriet nodded, relief evident in her face. "Your husband made that quite clear the other day. He's fortunate to have found you." She glanced across the gathering to where Matthew was speaking with the blacksmith. "And perhaps we were wrong about you not bearing up to life here. You seem stronger somehow." "Love can do that," Rebecca said simply. After the guests departed, Matthew carried Rebecca across the threshold of their home, now truly hers as well as his. They spent their wedding night with a gentleness necessitated by Rebecca's condition, but no less passionate for its care. In Matthew's arms, Rebecca felt whole in a way that transcended physical limitation, her body responding to his touch with a vigor that surprised them both. "I don't want to hurt you," Matthew whispered against her skin. Rebecca drew him closer. "You won't. Being with you makes me stronger, not weaker." Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with Matthew's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, Rebecca felt a profound peace. Whatever time they had, months, perhaps even years if she was fortunate, would be filled with love and purpose. She would know what it meant to be a wife, a partner, to share both joy and hardship with a man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Rebecca smiled in the darkness. "That I came to Idaho to die, but I found a reason to live instead." The months that followed their wedding brought changes to both Rebecca and the ranch. Though her illness remained, Rebecca found that having purpose and joy gave her strength she hadn't known she possessed. She couldn't do heavy work, but she made the cabin truly a home, organizing Matthew's books, adding touches of beauty with wildflowers and simple decorations, keeping a journal of ranch activities and weather patterns that Matthew found unexpectedly useful for planning. She also discovered a talent for accounts, bringing order to Matthew's haphazard record-keeping and identifying areas where small changes could increase the ranch's profitability. Her father had insisted she understand business matters, believing that women should be prepared to manage their own affairs, and now those lessons served her well. "You've made more difference to this place in 3 months than I did in 3 years, Matthew told her one evening as they sat before the fire, her ledgers spread between them. "This spring we'll be able to buy that south pasture from Johnson. Better water access means healthier cattle." Rebecca smiled, pleased by his praise but even more by the easy way he spoke of their future together. Neither of them pretended her condition wasn't serious, but neither did they allow it to prevent them from making plans, from living fully in whatever time they had. There were hard days, of course. Days when Rebecca could barely rise from their bed, when breathing was a conscious effort and pain wrapped around her ribs like iron bands. On those days, Matthew would carry her to the porch rocker, wrapping her in blankets so she could at least see the mountains and feel the sun on her face. He learned to recognize the signs of an impending bad spell and would arrange his work accordingly, staying close to the cabin when she needed him most. The town's attitude toward them shifted gradually. Harriet Simmons and her circle, having seen the marriage last beyond their dire predictions, revised their whispered comments. Rebecca's obvious happiness and the subtle but noticeable improvements in her strength contradicted their expectations, forcing them to reconsider their judgments. When Rebecca and Matthew came to town together, they were met with genuine greetings rather than whispers. The change was gradual but unmistakable: respect replacing pity, acceptance replacing doubt. Winter came early to the Idaho mountains that year, the first snow falling in late October. The ranch was prepared, thanks to Rebecca's organizational skills and Matthew's hard work. The cabin was snug, with wood stacked high and preserves lining the shelves. On cold evenings, they would sit before the fire, Matthew reading aloud while Rebecca mended or knitted. Jack the dog sprawled between them. It was during one such evening in early December that Rebecca felt the first fluttering movements within her abdomen, so faint she thought she might have imagined it. She said nothing to Matthew, not wanting to raise hopes that might be crushed. But 3 days later the sensation came again, stronger this time, unmistakable. "Matthew," she said that night as they prepared for bed, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned from banking the fire, concern immediately crossing his features. "Are you feeling worse?" "No." Rebecca took his hand and placed it on her still flat abdomen. I believe I'm carrying a child." Matthew's face went utterly still, a complex mix of emotions crossing his features: hope, fear, wonder, and beneath it all, a profound vulnerability that brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "A baby," he whispered. "But the doctor in Philadelphia said you couldn't." "That your condition, doctors can be wrong," Rebecca said simply. "I've felt movement. It's early yet, but I'm certain." Matthew sank to his knees before her, his hands cradling her abdomen with infinite tenderness. When he looked up, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "A child," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child." The joy of the moment was tempered by reality they both understood but didn't need to voice. Pregnancy would strain Rebecca's already compromised health. Childbirth had killed Matthew's first wife, who had been healthy and strong. The risks were enormous. Yet as Matthew gathered her into his arms, Rebecca felt not fear but a fierce determination. This child was a gift. Neither of them had expected, a piece of their love that would remain even if her own time was limited. "We'll take every precaution," Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll bring the doctor from Boys if necessary." "Whatever you need," Rebecca touched his cheek, silencing him gently. "We will face this together, one day at a time, as we have faced everything else. That's all we can do." They agreed not to share the news widely until Rebecca was further along, but Mrs. Peterson guessed almost immediately when they visited Caldwell the following week. "You're glowing," the older woman said, studying Rebecca's face as they sat in the boarding house parlor. "And you've not touched the coffee I offered. Only one thing makes a woman refuse coffee she normally enjoys." Rebecca couldn't help but smile at the older woman's perception. "We weren't planning to tell anyone yet." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "Your secret's safe with me, dear, but I'll be praying for you, for all three of you." The winter passed slowly, snow isolating the ranch for days at a time before Matthew could clear a path to town. Rebecca's pregnancy progressed despite her condition. Indeed, she found herself breathing more easily than before, as if the child within her had somehow strengthened her failing lungs. "It happens sometimes," Dr. Harris told them when he visited in February, having made the journey from Boys at Matthew's insistence. The increased blood flow during pregnancy can temporarily improve certain conditions. It doesn't mean the underlying disease is cured, but it's giving you a respite that's beneficial for both you and the baby. The doctor was cautiously optimistic about Rebecca's chances of carrying the child to term, though he made no promises about her survival beyond the birth. "Take each day as it comes," he advised. "Stay warm, eat well, rest when your body demands it. You're stronger than you appear, Mrs. Lynch." By spring, Rebecca's condition was impossible to hide. Her belly rounded proudly beneath her dresses, and though she tired easily, she moved with more energy than she had possessed before the pregnancy. The town's reaction was mixed, some offering genuine congratulations, others barely concealing their concern about the wisdom of bringing a child into a situation they still viewed as doomed. "She can't bear life as it is," Rebecca overheard Clara Wilson telling the minister's wife outside the general store. "How will she manage motherhood in her condition?" Before the minister's wife could respond, another voice cut in. Harriet Simmons, surprisingly. "Clara Wilson, that is quite enough. The Lynches have proven everyone wrong at every turn. Perhaps it's time we recognize that we don't know everything about their situation." Rebecca slipped away before they noticed her, a small smile playing on her lips. Harriet Simmons defending her the world was full of surprises. As summer approached, bringing with it the anniversary of Rebecca's arrival in Caldwell, Matthew made improvements to the cabin. He added a proper nursery adjoining their bedroom, with a window facing east to catch the morning sun. He built a cradle from pine he'd harvested from their land, carving it with care during the evenings as Rebecca worked on tiny garments. "Boy or girl?" he asked one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Rebecca considered, her hands resting on her prominent belly. "I don't know. I haven't had any feelings either way. Does it matter to you?" Matthew shook his head. "Not in the slightest. Healthy is all I ask." He covered her hands with his. "And for you to stay with us, if that's not asking too much of God or fate or whatever determines such things." Rebecca leaned against him, understanding the fear that underlay his words. "I'm not planning to go anywhere, Matthew Lynch. I've grown rather fond of this life we're building." The baby arrived on a clear July morning, heralded by labor pains that woke Rebecca before dawn. Matthew, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, was instantly alert. "It's time?" he asked, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. Rebecca nodded, breathing through the contraction. "I think so, but there's no rush yet. First babies take their time, they say." Matthew was already pulling on his clothes. "I'm sending one of the hands for Mrs. Peterson. She said she wanted to be here and she's had experience with birthing." The labor progressed steadily through the morning. Mrs. Peterson arrived by midday, bringing with her a calm competence that soothed Rebecca's growing anxiety as the pains intensified. Matthew remained close, supporting Rebecca physically and emotionally with a strength that belied his own fear. "You're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Peterson assured Rebecca as the afternoon waned. "The baby's positioned well, and your body knows what to do." Rebecca, exhausted but determined, focused on her breathing as Matthew had taught her, using techniques he'd learned from an old cavalry medic. Each contraction brought them closer to meeting their child, but also closer to the moment of greatest danger for Rebecca's weakened body. As sunset painted the mountains outside their window, Rebecca gathered her remaining strength for the final push. Matthew held her upright, his arms steady as she bore down with all her might. "That's it," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed. "The head is here. One more push, Rebecca." With a cry that was half pain and half triumph, Rebecca gave a final push, feeling the baby slide from her body into Mrs. Peterson's waiting hands. There was a moment of breathless silence, then a strong, indignant wail filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Peterson announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A perfect, strong boy." Matthew's arms tightened around Rebecca as they both stared in wonder at the red-faced, squalling infant being cleaned and wrapped by Mrs. Peterson. When the older woman placed the bundled baby in Rebecca's arms, she felt a love so overwhelming it momentarily took her breath away. "He has your eyes," Matthew whispered, his voice breaking as he touched their son's tiny hand. "And your spirit, I think, to announce himself so forcefully." Rebecca smiled tiredly, studying the perfect features of their child. "What shall we call him?" Matthew considered the tiny face. "James," he suggested. "After my father, James Thomas Lynch." "James," Rebecca repeated, feeling the rightness of it. "Welcome to the world, James Lynch. You are so very loved." The birth had taxed Rebecca's strength severely, but contrary to the dire predictions that had followed her pregnancy, she did not die in childbed. The days following James's arrival were difficult, her recovery slow, her body exhausted, but with each passing week, she grew stronger rather than weaker. By the time James was a month old, Rebecca was able to sit on the porch with him, watching as Matthew worked in the yard, Jack the dog keeping faithful watch beside them. The baby thrived, growing plump on his mother's milk, his eyes indeed the same clear blue as Rebecca's, taking in the world with seemingly boundless curiosity. When James was 2 months old, they took him to Caldwell for the first time. The journey was carefully planned, with frequent stops to allow Rebecca to rest and tend to the baby. Their arrival caused something of a sensation. Many in town had privately doubted they would see either Rebecca or her child alive. Harriet Simmons was among the first to greet them, her usual reserve melting at the sight of the healthy baby in Rebecca's arms. "He's beautiful," she said with genuine warmth. "And you're looking remarkably well, Mrs. Lynch." "Thank you," Rebecca replied, surprising herself by meaning it. "Motherhood agrees with me, it seems." The town's minister performed a christening ceremony the following Sunday, with Mrs. Peterson standing proudly as godmother. As Rebecca and Matthew presented their son before the congregation, she was struck by how far she had come from the dying woman who had stepped off the stagecoach a year earlier. Her health remained precarious. The consumption would never be completely vanquished, but she had found a strength within herself that transcended physical limitation. That evening, as they prepared to return to the ranch, Clara Wilson approached them outside the church, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mrs. Lynch," she began, then paused, seemingly unsure how to continue. "I owe you an apology. Many of us in town, myself especially, judged your situation harshly when you first arrived. She can't bear life out here, we said." She glanced at the sleeping infant in Matthew's arms. "You've proven us wrong in the most beautiful way possible." Rebecca might once have felt vindicated by such an admission, but now she felt only compassion for a woman who had never faced the kind of challenges that revealed one's true capacity for living. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Life can surprise us all, I think." Matthew, who had remained silent during the exchange, spoke then, his voice carrying quietly in the evening air. "My wife didn't just bear life, Mrs. Wilson. She gave mine back to me. That's plenty enough to silence any doubts about her strength." As they drove home beneath a sky brilliant with stars, James sleeping peacefully between them, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west to die with dignity, away from pitying glances and whispered predictions. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a joy so profound it made even difficult days worthwhile. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked. Noticing her contemplative expression, Rebecca smiled. taking his hand. That sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. Matthew's fingers tightened around hers. Our story isn't ending anytime soon, he said with quiet certainty. We've got a ranch to build, a son to raise, and years ahead of us. Rebecca looked at their sleeping child, then at the man beside her whose love had given her a reason to fight for every breath. Yes, she agreed softly. Years ahead. And though neither of them could know exactly how many years they would have together, both understood with perfect clarity that it wasn't the quantity that mattered, but the fullness with which those years were lived. In finding each other, they had both found the courage to embrace life completely, whatever it might bring, however long it might last. As the ranch came into view, the cabin windows glowing with welcome light, Rebecca felt a profound sense of homecoming. This place, these people, they were hers, and she was theirs. The journey that had begun in despair had led her to a joy she could never have imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach, weak and alone. Life in Idaho Territory remained challenging. Rebecca's health had good days and bad. There were times when the consumption seemed to retreat, allowing her months of relative strength, and times when it reasserted itself, confining her to bed for days on end. But through it all, Matthew remained steadfast, caring for her with tender competence when she was ill, celebrating with quiet joy when she was stronger. James grew from an infant to a toddler, his sturdy little body and curious mind a daily reminder of the miracle they had created together. By his second birthday, he was the image of his father in miniature, same determined jaw, same thoughtful expression, but with Rebecca's blue eyes and quick smile. On that birthday, as they sat on the porch watching James chase fireflies in the twilight, Matthew took Rebecca's hand. "I've been thinking about something you once said, about coming west to die, but finding a reason to live instead." Rebecca nodded, wondering where his thoughts were leading. "The doctor in Boys says you've outlived every prediction for your condition, that the disease seems to have. Not gone away exactly, but stabilized." Matthew's eyes held hers, hope and caution mingled in their depths. "He thinks you might have years ahead, not just months." Rebecca had suspected as much herself. The bad days still came, but they were less frequent, less devastating. "Does that change anything for you?" she asked gently. Matthew shook his head emphatically. "Only that I'm grateful for every day we're given, however many there might be." He hesitated. "But I wondered if it might change something for you, if you might want more. Rebecca repeated, not understanding. Matthew gestured to James, who had tired of chasing fireflies and was now examining a fascinating stick with great concentration. "Another child, perhaps. The doctor thinks you could carry another safely, given how well you did with James." Rebecca's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to see possibilities where others saw only limitations. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "If you're certain." Matthew's answer was to draw her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. 3 years after James's birth, Rebecca gave birth to their daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Lynch, on a snowy December night. The birth was easier than James's had been, and Rebecca recovered more quickly, surprising even Dr. Harris with her resilience. "2 miracles, Mrs. Peterson declared when she came to visit, cradling the newborn while James helped by bringing increasingly improbable items. He thought his sister might need a pine cone, a wooden horse, his father's pocket watch. 3, Rebecca corrected, watching her family with a heart so full it seemed impossible it could be contained within her healing body. "My children and their father." As the years passed, the Lynch ranch prospered. Matthew's careful management and Rebecca's sharp business sense allowed them to expand their holdings. adding the south pasture as planned and later purchasing an adjoining property when its owner decided to return east. James grew into a thoughtful, capable boy who showed early signs of sharing his father's affinity for ranching and his mother's love of books. Sarah, blonde and blue-eyed like Rebecca, developed a spirited independence that both challenged and delighted her parents. The consumption never left Rebecca entirely. There were still winter months when she struggled to breathe, still days when fatigue overwhelmed her. But there were also springs when she could work in her garden for hours, summers when she could ride alongside Matthew to the furthest reaches of their property, autumns when she could preserve the harvest with Mrs. Peterson without needing to rest every hour. They never took a single day for granted, never assumed there would always be another sunrise to share. Perhaps that was their greatest strength. The awareness of life's fragility made them appreciate its beauty all the more acutely. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Rebecca with a small piano for the cabin's main room, an extravagance they could now afford, brought all the way from Denver by wagon. "You mentioned once that your mother taught piano," he explained as Rebecca stared at the instrument in disbelief. "I thought perhaps you might like to teach our children." That evening, Rebecca played for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. Her fingers were rusty, but the music came back to her Bach and Mozart, and the simple hymns her mother had taught her first. James and Sarah watched in fascination, never having heard such sounds in their home before. Matthew sat in his chair by the fire, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face as she played, remembering, creating new memories to layer over the old. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Matthew held Rebecca close in their bed. "Happy?" he asked, a ritual question that had become a touchstone over the years. "Beyond words," she answered, as she always did. But this time she added, "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't been at the stage depot that day, if you hadn't offered to carry my trunk?" Matthew considered this. "I like to think we'd have found each other somehow, but I'm grateful we didn't have to test that theory." His arms tightened around her. "When I saw you step down from that coach, something in me recognized you, not your face we'd never met but your spirit. It was like finding a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing." Rebecca pressed closer to him, marveling at how their bodies still fit together so perfectly after a decade. "I came to Caldwell expecting only peace at the end. I never imagined I'd find a beginning instead." The town had changed over the years, growing larger as the territory became a state and more settlers arrived. Harriet Simmons's husband was no longer mayor, having been replaced by a younger man with ambitious plans for Caldwell's future. Clara Wilson had moved to Boise after remarrying. Mrs. Peterson still ran the boarding house, though she now employed a younger woman to handle the heavier work. But the greatest changes were in how the town viewed the Lynches. The whispers of "she can't bear life" had long since been replaced by respect and even admiration. Rebecca was now known for her sharp mind and generous spirit, serving on the school board and organizing assistance when illness or hardship struck other families. Matthew, while still reserved by nature, had become a respected voice in community decisions, particularly those affecting the area's ranchers. Their children thrived in this environment, growing up with the freedom of the ranch and the advantages of a town nearby. Both James and Sarah inherited their parents' love of learning, devouring the books that filled the shelves. Matthew continued to build as their library expanded. On a crisp October day in their 15th year of marriage, Rebecca sat on the porch, watching as Matthew taught 12-year-old James to shoe a horse while 9-year-old Sarah offered running commentary from her perch on the corral fence. The mountains rose behind them, dusted with early snow, the sky so intensely blue it almost hurt to look at it. Rebecca's health had been especially good that year, the best since before her illness began. Dr. Harris, on his annual visit, had pronounced her lungs clearer than he'd ever heard them, though he cautioned that the disease could flare again without warning. As she watched her family, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given so much more than she had ever dared hope for when she arrived in Caldwell, a husband whose love had never wavered, children who brought daily joy, a home that sheltered them all. Matthew glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, the one reserved just for her, still made her heart beat faster after all these years. He said something to James, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch. "You're looking thoughtful," he observed, sitting beside her on the swing they'd added years ago. Rebecca leaned against him, drawing strength and warmth from his solid presence. "I was thinking about everything we've built together, how none of it seemed possible when I stepped off that stagecoach." Matthew took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture so familiar it was almost an extension of her own body. "You know what Clara Wilson said to me last week in town? She said, 'Lynch, I never thought I'd say this, but you two proved us all wrong. Your wife didn't just bear life here, she thrived." Rebecca laughed softly. "And what did you say?" Matthew's eyes, still as blue and direct as they had been on the day they met, held hers. "I told her what I've known since the beginning. She gave mine back to me. That's plenty enough to silence any doubts." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Rebecca and Matthew remained on the porch, the swing moving gently beneath them. James had successfully completed the shoeing under his father's guidance, his face glowing with pride. Sarah had abandoned her commentary to chase Jack's latest pup around the yard, her laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. This was the life Rebecca had found in Caldwell, Idaho, not an ending, but a beginning that continued to unfold with each passing day. A life built on love, courage, and the profound understanding that it was not the length of one's days that mattered, but the fullness with which they were lived. And by any measure, Rebecca Mills Lynch's life had become immeasurably full.